There's an awful lot going on here this morning. Almost too much. Almost. Oh, and by the way, I'm not talking about the events of the morning. The feast of your patron saint, a visit from the Jesuit provincial and superintendent of schools for the archdiocese, the commissioning of Bellarmine's newest liturgical ministers, the installation of a new director of the work in Bellarmine's 13th president, the missioning of the board of directors to whom is entrusted the mission of this great school. That's a lot. But believe it or not, that's nothing compared to what I'm talking about. What's really going on here this morning. And as important as each of those wonderful events is, celebrating them ought not distract us from the real reason we have gathered here this morning. The reason we always gather around this table. Let me come back to that. Have you ever wondered what it would have been like to be with Jesus when he walked the earth? I suspect you have. Especially you students who have been here for a year or longer. I suspect you've been encouraged to imagine yourselves with Jesus. St. Ignatius loved to do that, to engage his God-given imagination, to enter into the stories of the gospel and to encounter Jesus, his followers, his family, and friends, and even his enemies. Most of my Jesuit life, I have been a high school teacher at schools a lot like this one, with students a lot like you, intelligent and gifted, full of life, and filled with faith, and sometimes doubt. That's the line from today's gospel that really pops for me. When they saw Jesus, they worshiped, but they doubted. Context here is important. This is the end of Matthew's gospel, the very end, as in the final words. Matthew's gospel, sometimes referred to as the gospel of the church, ends with a story of faith and doubt. So this is after the manger and the star, the baptism and temptations, the sermons, stories and healings, transfiguration, tension, confrontation, a final meal, arrest, torture, and death. It's after the resurrection, too. Think about that. This encounter is with the risen Christ, present to these disciples in glory. The fundamental mystery of our lives was right before them. No wonder they worshiped. But they also doubted. I'm interested in knowing if the young people here today can relate to those disciples in their faith and in their doubt. But first, I'd like to invite you to imagine what Jesus might have felt at that moment. He has completed the mission given to him by his Father. He has poured out his life, even unto death. And now he stands with his closest friends and followers and sees in their eyes faith and doubt. If we could be there, looking at Jesus, what would we see in his eyes? What was his response to their faith and doubt? I suppose we might have different answers to that, rooted in our own experience. That's what happens, when we allow ourselves to engage our God-given imagination with the gospel. Our stories begin to interact with the story of our salvation history, and from that comes grace, a real encounter with the living God. Maybe he felt frustrated that after all he had said and done and endured, they still weren't completely on board. Maybe he felt fear that these friends in whom he had invested so much were in the end not up to the task. Maybe he felt compassion, understand, given all that they had been through. The fact is, we don't know exactly what Jesus felt at that moment, but we do know what he chose to do. His response to their faith and their doubt was mission and promise. Mission. Go. Spread faith. Teach. And promise, I'm with you. Always. There was a lot going on with them. Almost too much. Almost. They really loved him. And they wanted so badly to be faithful. But when things got difficult, they faltered and they ran. Their fragile faith was tested by life, and especially by death. And even now, with Jesus right there in their midst, doubt. But Jesus believed in them just as they were. He missioned them and he promised them, I'm with you. I am with you. And we are here today gathered around this table because of their imperfect faith and because God keeps promises. There is an awful lot going on here this morning in your life and in the life on your left, on your right, before you and behind you. Right here in this room, there is profound faith that on any given day is tested by life, and sometimes even death. If we're not paying attention, and here's the point, if we're not paying attention, we can forget that or ignore that. I've been on this campus enough to know that on any given day, this campus is filled with joy. I've seen it. But I've been alive long enough to know that someone on your right or left, behind you or before you, perhaps even you or your family, is struggling today with heartbreak or addiction, unemployment, divorce, depression, cancer, or just the anxiety that comes with being a young person today. Right? It's true today, it was true yesterday, and it's going to be true tomorrow. And that's just in this room. These days, you have to be living under a rock not to see that our communities and cities, our nation and world, our planet, is broken and suffering, in desperate need of lives like yours. give us pause, you know. Look, if you've never really been shaken by the reality around you, it's time. You're not too young. Not anymore. Faced with life and even death, it can seem like too much, but it's not. I promise you. No, don't take my promise. God promises you, and all of us, I am with you. And that's enough. Enough for what? Enough to survive? To get by? No. Enough for your mission. Jesus knows your faith, and He knows it's imperfect. It was a gift from your Creator in the first place. And Jesus knows your doubt, too. And His response for you and for me is a mission. We heard it in our first reading. Set an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Attend to reading and teaching. Be diligent. Be absorbed. St. Paul is painting with broad strokes in his letter to Timothy, but I think he nails it with this admonition. Do not neglect the gift you have. Not this year. Not this day. There is too much at stake to your left and right, before you and behind you, deep inside you. In a few moments, Father Provincial will mission Mr. Morelli as he begins his new ministry here at Bellarmine. But don't be fooled into thinking that you are off the hook. The mission he receives today is all about you. His mission only exists to help enable yours. There's way too much going on in this room for any one man or one woman to tackle. Let me put it another way. God needs each and every one of us to accept our common mission. What is that mission in the concrete today? I don't know. But I know it has something to do with your gifts and how you are using them. So talk about that. Pray about that today and every day. This is a good place to start together around this table, worshiping Jesus, who is right here in our midst,